Hello? Let's get through another part of this book, Talking to Terrorists. We left Israel and Palestine behind, and now we're going to sort of run around Europe and North Africa a little bit. So this is a little more disconnected from politics and more connected on individual events and circumstances. She's in Morocco for now. Apparently there are some horrific slums there. So she has decided to walk down and introduce herself and interview folk. Okay, so she starts off, what is your opinion and why Jordanians and Syrians go as bombers to attack the U.S. forces in Iraq? I asked Sadija. It's very simple, Sadija answers with her husband translating. It's resistance against a foreign occupier. I agree with them completely. Would you go if you had the chance? I ask, curious to hear how strongly she feels. Me? She answers, I don't have such courage, and I have a child and my responsibilities here. But yes, I'd agree with them and I'd give money, I'd give any material support I could. You must understand that for me, the Arabic people are all the same people. What happens to Iraqis also happens to me. I mean, so again, politics enters the fray. But more importantly, it's less about what happens to me. Like, have I suffered individually? Have I been attacked or thrown in prison? And more the feeling that, oh, my people have been attacked or thrown in prison. Someone else that is connected to me, that is alike to me. You expand your identity to include a entire section of the planet, all of Arabia, or all of Europe, or all of America, or all Spanish-speaking countries, or all of Asia, or all of Southeast Asia, these sorts of things. And, as individuals, we all experience this. Oh my gosh, look at this terrible thing that is happening to a group of people. We don't even have to identify with them as a specific group. We can say, well, that's a human being that this is happening to. And I think it's a little easier to support terrorists and fighters going somewhere else if you stay home. Right? I mean, in the United States, how many people would be so gung-ho for Vietnam, for example, or the Middle East, if they had to go themselves instead of simply voting or waiting and sitting there as someone else sends people that they don't belong to, right? If your child has to go and fight in Iraq or Afghanistan, you may feel a little differently about this than if you don't have any children and you're 45 years old and you aren't going yourself. So I do wonder about that. The people who are, for example, motivated to go to these places, and do they regret it? Do they come back? Or do you arrive in Syria and be like, I'm going to be a fighter in Syria, and are you stuck there? Do you still have the faith and hope and reasons for fighting a month into your experience there or not? I think that's a little questionable. That's something to ask. She continues. As the evening progresses, we discuss politics in Morocco, and Mokhtar explains to me that religion is a very powerful force for creating political change in Arabic countries. When freedom of expression is so lacking and government repression is so strong and there's no possibility to speak against it safely, Mokhtar explains, there is one way that exists that not even the government can speak against, and that way is religion. then religious expression for the purposes of political discourse on behalf of promoting social justice can be a very powerful medium, because no one, not even the government, can go against the Quran. And that, I think, is also interesting. You know, we in the States, especially growing up in the States, hear about Islamic terrorism. You hear about the Muslim Brotherhood, right? And you see on TV folk dressed differently than you, or wearing this clothing that hides their entire body. Don't know what's happening. My voice there, right? And you see someone talking, and you hear about it, and you're going, why is it all religion, right? Why do we have to be involved in religion? Why is religion entering into this at any point? And yet here in the States, how often do we hear about, well, against abortion because of Christian reasons, right? Or God is with this person or that person, or God is against this idea or that idea, right? We had the exact same event here. It's just that we look at religion, I think, as probably a dangerous power, right? Because someone who is religious enough that they use their religion to decide what their morals are, is someone that is very difficult to argue against, right? Because you're not arguing effectiveness or non-effectiveness. You're not arguing the constitutional law or whether it's basic decency. You end up arguing, well, the book says this, your priest says that, and how effective can such an argument even be? As well, I think European civilization, Western civilization in general, still has memories in it of the wars between the Catholics and the Protestants. Still has the memory of the issues in Germany, for example, or the issues in Ireland, or the issues like the communists or the Chinese had against stepping out religion entirely. Right, we grow up in California, at least, being taken to the missions, where you had thousands of Native Americans basically enslaved and forcefully converted. Right, and so, and in the States, we also had the idea, at least, that religion shouldn't be involved in politics because of this history, partially, is what I would say. Like, John F. Kennedy was elected president, and he was the first Catholic elected president, and apparently it was a big deal. It seems a little strange looking at it from this far in the future, and from a California which is mostly secular. Now, there are streets in my town with, I think, like 14 churches on it. Right, you see people wandering around in headscarves and burqas here once in a while. You see folk wearing crosses. You see folk on street corners waving signs, "The end of the world is nigh, repent." I was on the train just, 2 weeks ago? And some gal comes in, starts talking about religion. I don't remember what she said. I put on my headphones, drowned her out, because she's not going to change my mind, and I don't feel like arguing with her. I'm going to be on this train for like 10 minutes. I just want to get to where I'm at. Right? And why am I able to do that? Because I've heard it all before. Because I've heard people try to interject religion into politics and into action, and it's not needed in most cases, right? You can have this personal reason for why you do things. That's perfectly fine, you know? You can say, I believe in this book or this idea, and that is why I act this way, and that's why I vote this way, and perfectly fine. It's when you start using that, well, the book says this, so all of you should be acting in this way. I'm going, that seems a little suspicious and dangerous. Why do I think it's dangerous? Because in my head, I think in my culture, it's this history of religious war back and forth. And how do you get over that? Because the most terrible actions taken by folk are, at least as the story goes, right, in the name of religion. You have the Spanish Inquisition, the burning of witches alive. We learn about the Salem witch trials here. How religious fanaticism can lead to a mob mentality that picks up people who don't quite fit into the church or a certain way of life and then literally burns them alive. Or we hear stories about, so-and-so in the Middle East was stoned because they were attacked or something like this. And we're going, I don't really know. This is so great, right? In Japan, in China, you have this back and forth history between like the Buddhist monasteries and the emperors. You can hear about, I want to say, Sri Lanka or India, and there's another religious war here, and it's just, if you keep religion out of politics, is the American idea, or the old American idea at least, then you are able to have clearer discussions. But what they're pointing out here, I think, is the feeling you get, right, is that democracy in the Middle East is not very solidly set. There isn't a very strong foundation or history of it. It's a little hard to expect cultures and countries and people who are, as modern nation states go, rather younger, to act in the same way, right? Like France has a culture 1,000 years old as France, as this unified idea and unified culture, as there's the King of France, as we are of this religion and this idea and this politics, and we move in this certain way and with certain people. Whereas you look at Syria, for example, and what do you have, like 4 or 5 different ethnic groups? And this is the real claim against European colonialism and how it left, is that they didn't bother deciding or asking people in the areas they were splitting up who was supposed to be in charge. They did the same in Africa, right? Instead, they just drew lines on a map. And, that's how it is. And all of a sudden, you have, for example, in Middle East, Kurdistan, which theoretically, right, should be, it's more or less one ethnic group, and it should be its own country, duh. But now it's part of 3 or 4 different countries, and they all want to they all have their claim, and they don't want to deal with the separatists and so on. And then you have minor differences in the idea of Kurdistan itself. And Egypt, I think, has its own identity, but also hasn't been independent for all that long. Something like you get into Jordan, and there's something that's more gathered around a king figure, right? Get into Saudi Arabia, and it's relatively new idea again, right? Like, religion is a very powerful force for bringing people together. We refer to Arabia not just because of its geographical existence, but because Islam spread through Arabia and was used to unify the entire area, right? The different Islamic empires that existed there were religiously based empires. And if we look at Europe, one of the reasons that you ended up having the Protestant kingdoms is because the Catholic faith was based around the idea that the Pope speaks for God. Right? So you have the Pope interfering in politics all the time, which means that a lot of kings don't like this. So you had a sort of a central figure to push against. Whereas in the Islamic empires, as I understand it, again, I'm no expert in any of this, the like heir of Muhammad is non-existent. There's no clear line of this is exactly who was in charge and who was in charge and who was in charge, right? Like the Pope today, even with all the troubles and struggles and the two popes at several times or whatnot, is understood as the heir of Peter. But in Islam, as far as I know, there were times where you would have like the defender of the faith would be an emperor or a king or a sultan or something. And then you have the Sunni Shia split, and which is all its own complication, right? But I'm like, there doesn't seem to be like one particular figure that interfered in politics for 1,000 years, and instead it was used to unify. And the leader who unified using religious means also became the political leader themselves and military leader. So the entire history of religion and politics in the Middle East, at least, is entirely different than in Europe and in the United States. So maybe that also has something to do with it. Oh. This bit here, when he says, when freedom of expression is so lacking and government repression is so strong, if you don't feel like you can change things through secular means, right? Because in America, one of the basic ideas of American identity is the Bill of Rights. Like that's what we learn over and over again, right? You have these rights. These are my rights. You can't take advantage of my rights. The government can't do this. I, as an individual citizen, have these abilities to avoid, prosecution, unlawful detention, to freedom of speech and freedom of religion, to not be discriminated against because of color or skin or sex or age or whatnot, to be immune from unreasonable search and seizure, to all these different activities. And so instead of going, well, the Bible says this, we say, well, the Constitution says this, and that becomes sort of the central idea of American identity is based around these rights. European identity is, I feel like it's a little different, historically at least, because you go back and you're England or France or Germany or Italy. So the modern nation state is rather newer in Europe. The one based upon democracy and so on. It's I guess one based upon democracy and an idea, as opposed to democracy and a race or a history or a geographical space. Not that the United States of America is all that good either, but there's this, my vision, my understanding of the United States is probably different than a lot of other people's, I think. Because I'm going, the race, the land, the people, the history, none of this is important. What is important is the rights and the idea and the freedom of expression and the belief in freedom of religion and democratic rule and that we can talk things out and that we should work to improve the world and these sorts of ideas. I don't know. It's something I tend to struggle with, right? Because if I use religious language or if I use like religious sources to defend my ideas or to push my morals, then I feel as if I weaken my arguments and my claims. I feel as if I create a great gaping hole in the defenses because someone can just say, I don't believe your religion, therefore everything you say is invalid. But obviously, this person here in Morocco feels differently, right? That using a religion allows you to speak and say something, and using a religious claim is a way to stand against the government, to express your individuality instead of your membership in a group. So it's interesting to me. It seems a more collective identity. Which pushes part of the reason why, like you might be inspired to travel halfway across the world in order to defend people that you don't really know or have a connection to, or fight against the American imperialists or whatnot that don't affect you because you have a more collective identity, because you had this religious link, because there's someone who can understand you, someone who agrees with you way over there. Okay. Another point here. The young men go on to explain that the recruiter convinced their friends to become more devout, and in doing so, they cleaned up their lives, got off drugs, and swore illicit sex so that they could be good Muslims. Then, after watching so many jihadi films, he convinced them that the best way to ensure attaining paradise was to martyr themselves. So what she's talking about here is people who live basically sucky lives, right? You're into drugs or prostitution or your crime and whatnot, and your life sucks. Home sucks. Everything sucks. What do you do? Well, sometimes a church can help you. Like, I've known people like this who they turn their entire lives around. They are able to take this religious message or this community of religion that they enter into, and that helps them to improve themselves. They use it as a reason and a flame to ignite their light of reasons so that they may avoid the temptation of all these terrible drugs and crimes they have been involved in, right? They want to make their life better, and they find that this helps them to make their lives better. This helps them to grow and expand and be healthy. And they use this religion as a sort of crutch or walking staff, or star high blazing in the sky, revealing the truth before their eyes, sort of thing. And when you do that, you gain a strength, right? But you also become vulnerable to the message of that religion, or the message of the person who chose you the religion. Because this is how cults start, right? You have someone who finds a message of hope, receives a message from hope from a certain person, and that person embodies to them that hope, that idea. That person seems wise and important and strong, well-learned, beloved by God, a priest of some sort. And they think that person knows what is right, and I don't know what is right. I'm foolish. Look at what I've done with my choices in my life, guns and drugs and just hurting all the time. But now that I'm following this person's advice, now that they've helped me, I feel better. And ideally what happens, right, is you get some poor waif, sucky life. They get into a religion or a group, or become involved with the local police activities union, activity league. We had that in my school, right? Or they become involved in youth soccer, or they become involved in theater in college. They become involved in something, and then you have always a neophyte out of that. You have someone who listens to a certain music because other people he knows listen to that music, who dresses a certain way because other people she knows dress that way, who believes a certain thing because other people they know believe that thing. And it's like someone who gets into protesting, right? You enter into it and you think, oh my gosh, this is bad. I should protest. I should say something. And then you realize there's more complications. And then you end up understanding that there are different ways of looking at this problem. And you understand there are different groups that are protesting for different reasons. And you encountered with that complexity, encountered with the understanding that people dress in different ways, that people believe different things, that people act in different ways, right? That they can all still be good. You have different protesters protesting in different ways or different times, and they're still all good. You have different people dressing in different ways in different times, and they're still all good. There's something admirable about them. You have your clique in the theater group, but you can recognize other theater groups. You can go to other plays and realize, oh, that's good, right? All of a sudden you enter into a bigger community and you take on this identity of your own. You slowly become more confident in your own, religion or politics or just identity outside and apart from the group or the idea or the book. And you can challenge those ideas and you can improve them, and all of a sudden you aren't as vulnerable to someone telling you right or wrong, good or bad. You aren't as vulnerable. But before you reach that stage, you are, I think, in a very dangerous place. The newly converted can be in trouble, right? Because they have no place to fall back upon. And they aren't yet ready to go forward and move past this basic understanding, to become their own teacher, to become their own priest or fashionista or critic. And in that time, what do you do to them, right? Do you help them grow, or do you manipulate them? Because that's the danger here, right? After watching so many jihadi films, he convinced them the best way to ensure attaining paradise was to martyr themselves. So we have another method for how someone gets involved in terrorism. And this here is religion. But as I've been trying to make clear, it doesn't have to be religion. It can be politics just as well. It can be being involved in a rebel group for the freedom of our nation and our people. Look at this injustice, look at this terrible thing, and now all of a sudden the fight for self-independence revitalizes and fixes people. Or they feel it fixes them, at least. We can see this here in the States, right? I've been talking about, if you're protesting, you could be protesting on the right or the left. You could be protesting against the government or against some other protest. You could be counter-protesting, right? And eventually I feel the ideal is that you understand others have differing political views, but they're honest and they're open about it, right? Like someone might be anti-abortion, but I can at least appreciate their honest, religious and moral feelings about it. I may disagree for a dozen reasons, but I can at least, I'm like, okay, I understand why you believe that way. And I can at least, sort of respect or acknowledge or look at you face to face in our disagreement here. Whereas other folk, we might say, okay, you're very hypocritical. Like you're pro, like the argument. What's the argument that's always used, right? Well, they're pro-life, but they don't help the kids at all, right? They're pro-life, but they're anti, like paying for daycare or something. Like they're anti-school lunches. And so you have a bunch of kids who are basically forced to be born, and then they end up with crappy lives. And if we're gonna force them to be born, then we have some responsibility for that, and so we should vote for school lunches and things and free daycare and things like that, because what we're forcing these kids to exist when they would not have existed otherwise, or allowing them to exist when they would not have existed otherwise, depending on nomenclature you use. And you go, okay, there's a difference between someone who I think is actually pro-life and someone who just has a religious idea, but if it isn't really ready to commit to what that means. And in the same way, if you might be, pro-abortion, and you may say, hey, yeah, pro-choice, that's what I have, and that's what I'm for, and so on. But are you really willing to commit to what that means, right? Are you willing to, for example, what's the bit? It's like, you can have abortions through like pills they send you in the mail now. And there are people against laws like that for safety reasons. Well, it becomes a little complicated, right? How do you think that this should be achieved or activated? Do you think that the federal government should help pay for it, or help not pay for it at all? You get into the weeds and the mud, and you can have disagreements. And so I wonder how often you can also be like, you can be anti-abortion and then see someone on the pro-choice side and go, okay, I understand why you believe that with the autonomy and so on, but I think that killing children is wrong. So I understand, I know why you feel that, and I accept and respect that and so on, but I feel differently for my own reasons. Can you have that dialogue back and forth? I think it's more difficult with religion, because religion is based upon these very solid ideas which are not to be questioned. Although I say that secular philosophies can take the same place, right? I mean, how people, upon hearing anything about the Second Amendment, go, oh my God, they're trying to take away our guns. I'm like, look, there's some complications here, right? We got a lot of school shootings. Perhaps we should try to do something about that. And here's an idea. That doesn't mean I'm trying to take away your guns. It means I'm trying to stop school shootings, right? There's something going on here. Like, you can go, okay, they're trying something. I might disagree with the method, but I understand the reasoning. But there are people who just have a straight up gut force reaction. Oh my God. I mean, you have someone to try to paint the other side. You have people who, at any mention of religion, they go, oh my God, you should keep that to yourself. I mean, it goes back and forth. Although I think obviously on one or the other sides, on a particular side of that, for my own reasons, which I can articulate, and maybe I will eventually, depending what books I read. But that's what it's mentioning here, in regards to terrorism, that you get people who are helped and fixed by a group, but then they become very vulnerable to it. You can join a gang because the gang helps feed you and gives you direction and gives you pride in your life, but then all of a sudden you're into running drugs for the gang. And you're going, okay, I didn't really mean to end up here. I think I've met quite a few people like that who, they're 25, 26, got out of prison for the third time, and they go, okay, I didn't really mean to end up here. I obviously messed up somewhere. Let me try and figure out what that is. But when they were 18, they weren't thinking that. When they were 16, no. They were just running along with a group that told them who they were and gave them their identity. They didn't have yet the maturity or the strength to realize their own and question these things. And the further maturity or strength to realize that they can question these things and other people can question them in turn, right? That we're in a large back and forth dialogue taking place over millennia. Okay. So another statement here. Yusuf leans close to me and says quietly in a mixture of French and broken English, I was so angry when I found out they went to bomb themselves and didn't tell me beforehand. You would have tried to stop them, I say. No. His answers totally surprise me. I was angry that they didn't take me with them. He adds, gazing sadly into my eyes. I gasp. Why? You see our lives, he answers, and then I understood it all. They have so little to live for, and just maybe he could have gloriously exited to something better. Right? So here's a kid. I can understand that. My life sucks so bad, and I want to get out. But I'm not really brave enough to kill myself. but I'm not really brave enough to attempt to kill myself in order to live, or I don't know how to escape this area no matter what I do. So you're trapped and squeezed and crushed, and a lot of us are sort of stuck there. We're just surviving day by day. But what if your friend, a person you knew, goes out in a blaze, goes out in an explosion that attacks somebody or kills somebody or does something, and you go, okay, my life is worthless anyway, but I can gain worth by doing what they did. And how do I know I can gain worth? Because I feel that they have gained worth in my eyes. So if I do what they do, then someone else will see me in the same way that I see them. Right? This bit, I was so angry they didn't take me with them. Why couldn't you have taken me with you to heaven, to gloriousness? Why couldn't you have told me what you were planning so that I could join you, so that we could be together and friends and brothers and family? Because we're already dead. Right, we're already living in the slums, 4 or 5 or 7 to a room. There's nothing to eat. We're sick all the time. We're drinking sewage. We can't leave. If you go to the wrong part of town, we get shot. You can't get a visa. You can't even get an education. Right? You've got 4 diseases you can't afford medicine for. You can't get a job because people look at you, oh, you're from the slums, you must be a thief. So you resort to thievery, then you get caught, and then your hand gets chopped off. Or you get thrown in jail, you get beaten up, and you go, why am I even here? So again, how do you fix that? You give people hope. You say, you don't have to go out in a blaze. You don't have to join your friends this way. Let me show you a different friend who became a doctor, and you can do this too. But that's a huge ask, right? And what she's trying to point out here is that the terrorist kids coming from this are people who have been traumatized, who just don't understand or have a belief in a way out. After experiencing the slum myself and talking with these friends of the bombers and hearing the pain and desperation of their stunted lives caught in poverty and unemployment, I begin to understand. By no fault of their own other than place of birth, they are sentenced to dull lives where they have few good choices. They can be petty criminals, drug addicts, frequenters of prostitutes, stowaways, or other negative identities that all end badly and have few to no good paths in life. Of course, it's not just poverty and desperation. It took a terrorist recruiter and an active ideology to convince the martyrs that exploding themselves is an instant gateway to paradise. Once again, the lethal cocktail of terrorism had been at work. Each of these young men I've talked to today, and the bombers they told me about, were facing lives that are completely blocked with frustrated aspirations on all fronts. Even though education is provided by the state, they will not lead to jobs so long as they are slum dwellers. And without jobs, they have no chance of family or marriage or production, and only a bleak, endless future of nothingness, and all lack any positive means of escape from overwhelming despair and psychic pain. Instead, each found his own negative means of escape: drugs, prostitutes, and hopes of clandestine illegal migration, or the bombers found theirs in martyrdom. So that's again the question. How do you give people hope when they have no hope? How do you change the entire society? How do you allow for some expression of individuality and hope? And it's not just creating jobs. It's creating an environment where these jobs do something and mean something and have an effect. I would imagine just something like government beauty projects. Like we're going to clean up the streets. We're going to paint murals, or we're going to make music, something like this. But there's a danger in that too, right? You look at Germany and how many kids joined the Hitler Youth because the economy was in shambles and they felt humiliated, but now they can join a group and become part of something. Why do people join gangs and militants and rebels and the military? It gives you a sense of identity, a positive identity. More. Which suggests that in order to stop people from joining terrorism, you have to both paint the terrorists as a negative identity and give them a positive way of achieving the same political or emotional or relief of psychic pain ends. Okay. So now we switch gears. She goes to Beslan. It is August 2005, and I am on my way to the small town of Beslan in North Ossetia, one of the autonomous republics in the North Caucasus region of the Russian Federation, where 1 year ago Chechen-sponsored terrorists took over a school, taking 1,000 hostages, the majority of them children. The hostage takers quickly rigged bombs throughout the building and announced they were willing to martyr themselves and kill the hostages if their demands for the Russian forces to withdraw from Chechnya and allow it to become an independent republic were not met. A 3-day siege ended when Russian forces stormed the building. Tragically, 333 hostages were killed in the shootout, more than half of them children. So she is going to interview not the terrorist here. She's not interviewing a terrorist. She is going to be interviewing the children and the parents who suffered terrorism. I think it's sort of interesting to hear about something like this because 2005, I heard nothing about it. This was I don't I don't know what age I was. High school, middle school, somewhere in there. And this wasn't part of the news I heard. But obviously it has some great effect in Russia. And it's interesting hearing about terrorism in this way because growing up in the United States, the understanding was terrorism is a new thing, right? That 9/11 is strange, and maybe you'll have somebody here sending off a bomb or killing somebody or shooting people. But then you learn about history and you realize, oh, actually, terrorism is 200 years old at least, with the bombings and the explosions, and you learn about the Gunpowder Rebellion in England. 5th of November should never be forgot. Which was a terrorist activity. We're going to blow up the House of Lords because we don't agree with their views on religion and secularism. You read about, again, Palestine and Israel, and there you have terrorist activities going on there against each other and against the British. You read about 9/11, right? And then you realize that planes have been stolen before for all sorts of reasons, that planes have been crashed before by terrorists in Europe and in Africa. You read about the gas attacks in the London Underground. You read about this event in Russia. North Ossetia. North Ossetia? No, not Ossetia, Ossetia. Realize that this is a wider problem. It's not just, oh my gosh, it's something in the Middle East and there's IEDs or I don't know, right? This is the modern means of causing terror. Okay, so the hostage takers, 29 men and 3 women, were mostly Chechen or Ingush, were organized and dispatched by Shimil Besayev, the Chechen militant rebel leader who claimed they came from his martyr battalion. On the 1-year anniversary of the event, I'm on my way to interview the survivors of the siege. Okay. So these terrorists, they blew themselves up, but they also took 1,000 people hostage and rigged bombs and explosions and made a whole media frenzy of it. It wasn't just some person attacking those who had assaulted them directly, right? It wasn't, some Palestinian kid who's traumatized and terrorized and suffering and suicidal, wandering into a crowded hall and blowing themselves up. I mean, it's terrible, but this is something worse, I would say. This is an elementary school. This isn't even, the people who hurt you or the people who might have hurt you. This is 1,000 kids and their mothers that you make a spectacle of, and you torture and hurt. They deny them food and drink many times in these 3 days. And they're doing it only so that people can look at them and know more and more and more, and then they'll finally blow themselves up in a conflagration of hatred. But where they're doing it, it's like they're mocking the entire planet, saying, "Look at us and how much power we've got." Right? You can't stop us from killing these kids, and it's horrific. It's the hostage taking. Again, I understand the concept of hostage taking, right? I understand the idea and how it could be effective. It's when you take a hostage and then you torture them, you deny them food or drink, or you put them in a certain position, or you beat them up. I'm like, what's the point? Like, the point of taking a hostage, right, is to make someone else do something. It's not to make the hostage do anything. Like, they're taking hostage a bunch of kids, and like, what are the kids gonna do? Right, so they had a few males there, and so they took them to another room and shot them all because they thought they were the dangerous ones. Eventually, the Russian special forces invaded. They assaulted the gym. They assaulted the school where these kids were held, and it was not done excellently, shall we say? Okay, now she's talking to some of the people, some of the kids here, right? And something interesting, I think, it kind of happens. She's talking to one of the kids who was stuck in the gym. One of the kids who was held by these terrorists. And there was a psychologist that the government brought to talk to him, and he doesn't think that worked, right? I talked to 2 psychologists, Alan answered, but I didn't like it. The psychologist asked me to draw something, and I drew a bench. The psychologist asked me who can sit on the bench. It's a stupid question, he says with derision in his voice. Then she's like, I'm a better psychologist. Let me actually talk with you. I'm happy, and at least these open up today, and just found out that some psychologists let you keep your defenses, let you tell only what you're ready to tell. If the psychologists don't help much, what does help, I ask. We talk in our families, Edic answers. Does it help, I ask. No, it doesn't help, he answers honestly. What happens when you talk with your families, I ask. If I talk to my mom, she cries, Enoch explains. It's better not to talk to her, and Papa starts cursing the terrorists. I smile, understanding how they have the added burden to protect their parents too. Child survivors need their parents to stay put together. When their pain causes mom to cry and dad to begin cursing, children quickly learn it's better to keep their parents psychologically available and keep their pain locked inside. My mother cries, Alan answers. That's why I don't talk to her. I don't help Papa either. Everyone is angry. So we've been talking so far mostly about the terrorists or the people who might become terrorists. And now we have a kid who, like, he suffered this horrible event and he wants to tell someone about it. He wants to feel better, but he can't. Why? There's no one to talk to. So what's he going to end up doing? He's going to end up doing one of 2 things, right? He's going to end up either talking to the kids, the other people his age, his friends about this, right? He's going to end up going through the emotional catharsis of this speech and growing up and coming to terms with it. Maybe he'll go to the area these people came from one day. Maybe he'll become a teacher and he'll have to face this event emotionally, and he'll come out of it a raging phoenix. Or I can't talk with them. I can't talk with them. I can't talk with them. I can't explain. I don't know how to come to terms with this. So I'm going to bottle it up inside. I'm not going to talk about it. I'm not going to look at it. I'm not going to think about it. I'm not going to feel it. But of course you do feel it the whole time, and you can't escape it because it's in you. So you're vulnerable because you got this hole, or this blackness, or this heaviness inside, and you aren't quite able to heal and become whole. And it's very sensitive. If someone touches you in the right way, or you hear a piece of news that mentions terrorism, then you freak out, or you black out, or you become emotionally numb. Or if maybe you talk to someone someday, and they're a psychologist, or they're someone you fall in love with, and they help you get away from the blackness and help you heal. Or perhaps you talk to a terrorist recruiter who says, I know what you feel. You must be so angry. You must be in such despair. Follow my teachings or my religion or my politics, and that will help you become better, feel better. Then you enter what we had before. You enter that vulnerable state. So this is sort of the microcosm of a child who is not a terrorist and is not aiming to become a terrorist, but you can see how it might end up happening. It's someone who's traumatized and hurt. And if you don't heal that hurt, it becomes a wound. It becomes somewhere that someone can put a hook into and drag you around with your bloody beating heart on the ground. There's a kid. What are your nightmares about? Sveta looks me in the eyes. I think of our girls running and being shot in the back. Or this is a mother, I guess. The neighbor's daughter was 9. They ran together. That girl saw Elena, our daughter, getting shot in the back. The terrorist shut his eyes and was shooting his automatic. That girl and her mother went to the States for treatment. She lost her eye. In my mind, I struggle, Sveta replies. If I had been there, they would have survived. I feel this strongly. These words are so common in trauma survivors, especially bereaved parents, the feeling that they could have somehow prevented the tragedy if they had only been there. Psychologists call it survival guilt, the guilt of those who survived when others did not. If only I had been there, if only I'd been able to do something, right? If only I was strong and powerful, if only I was with them, if only I was honest and open and believed, or I was brave, then I could have changed things. And how do you react to that feeling, right? You either, again, there's 1,000 ways this could happen, right? 1,000 different directions you can go, but if I reduce it down to two or three main ones, right? Then it's either you recognize that you were weak, and so one day you decide not to be that anymore. Or you recognize that it wasn't your fault. That even if you were there, you would have just died and been shot because you didn't have a gun. And the terrorists did. And you come to terms with that you are not God, that you're not all-powerful. Or you end up breaking inside because you're so of this guilt and you don't know how to handle it, you don't know what to do, and then you're in a vulnerable, depressive state. You must blame the terrorists for your daughter's death, not yourself. That's another route, right? If only I had talked with my friends more, if only I had known what they were feeling, if only I had accepted their issues, if only I had emotionally connected with them, if only I knew, then I could have stopped them. Or if only I knew, then I could have joined them, I could have helped them, we could have been together. Could have died together. Amina's father has been silent up to now, alone in our group with his pain, but he begins to feel safe enough to touch it, to speak about it. As a father, I can't stop the pictures in my mind, he says. I always think I could have done something. What do you keep seeing? I ask gently. How my daughter was shot, he answers, pain contorting his face. How she fell, how no one could take her and save her at that moment. And then apparently there's a bit of debate about how the leaders handled this. That's something also to look at, right? How do you deal with terrorist activities? He's going on about Zasokov, our former president in North Ossetia. He's talking about Putin's officials was ordered by Putin's officials to refrain from heeding the terrorist call to come to the school to negotiate. Many well-known Russian figures had volunteered to go inside, remaining as hostages in exchange for the release of the children. But before any of their offers could be put into effect, the Russian forces had attacked the school. There's no easy answers. There's no, oh my gosh, this is exactly what you should have done. No matter what you do, you're going to be criticized. You should have done something else, unless you miraculously managed to make it so that nobody dies. But if somebody's already died, and then you're out of luck. You can't fix it, right? As soon as one terrorist goes off, as soon as one civilian, one innocent person is killed, then you are doomed no matter what you do. And how should we understand the way that our governments act? Should we believe they did this correct action? Should we criticize and attempt to come to a better understanding of this? Right? It's easy to attack the terrorists. It's easy to attack the people in charge, people who make the decisions. Right? Were the Russian special forces who went in? I mean, I'm sure they're well trained, right? Was there a plan? There was a tank firing for some reason at some point, right? Who was in charge here? Who was in charge? And nobody wants to tell that story, right? Nobody wants to be, I was in charge and I screwed up. That gets to a bigger issue, right? A more societal issue. How do you deal with the people in charge of stopping terrorism if they are not effective? Or if their methods lead to certain activities? And this is the issue in like Palestine and Israel, right? You have a government or an organization, and they come to an agreement about a possible peace, and then before you know it, someone has blown somebody up, someone has put out propaganda, someone is lying and hiding, some political figure is kicked out of power, and all of a sudden the entire thing is flipped on its head. You can't, there's no easy answer here. How do you continue? This is why the statement, like, we don't negotiate with terrorists, is a statement, because it allows us to say, this is the rule we follow. We do not negotiate with terrorists. And that just flat out, this is how we protect, this is how we deal. It says that instead of this particular person being in charge and being entirely at fault and entirely their issue, it is now our fault of the entire system, of everybody involved in this, because we agreed not to negotiate with terrorists. All the people in charge collectively share part of the guilt. But of course, the other problem, right? If everyone collectively shares part of the guilt, then no one is particularly guilty. Unless you're the leader. Unless you have a very pyramid-shaped structure, like, say, a military organization should be. Although we know that doesn't always happen either. She talks later about she's involved in like the Middle East with the Americans, and apparently their structure was kind of wonky as regards contractors and ideas. Okay. Our next interview was with a woman named Luda. She was held hostage with her 5-year-old daughter, a first grader who now suffers from PTSD. She's afraid to go back to school again, her mother explains. When she comes to some new place, she asks to look around for grenades. How will it be at school? After the siege, her character changed completely. She is afraid of every little noise and doesn't understand that they are not dangerous. She has regular nightmares, and lately she's becoming aggressive, begins to cry, and is very nervous. Luda also has PTSD and enduring medical problems. My blood pressure is high, I can't walk well, and I don't sleep much, 3 hours maximum. And I always see it like I'm looking at some movie. But nothing helps to survive such horror. No medicine can help me. Luda was inside the school when the terrorists appeared. From the railroad side, an athletic, well-built boy came wearing black, she recalls. Men were running to us. When they reached us inside the school, they took off their masks and were shooting in the air and screaming, "Shut up." But when pupils began to run, they began to shoot around as well. Then I lost my daughter. I was running to find my daughter, and they were shooting in the corridor. When we left inside, the terrorists put gas under the door. We couldn't breathe, and something happened with our eyes. Go over there and take seats, they told us, and they forced people to break the windows with their hands, to jump into the gym. They were shooting at them, and they did it in a panic. One of the terrorists came and put his automatic gun to one of our male PE teachers' neck to force him to the floor. He fell on his knees as the terrorist shot him. Blood ran all over. It streamed over our legs. Children were shouting and crying. I hid my daughter's head. The terrorists shouted that they will kill everyone in that way. The terrorists ordered the older boy to carry his body back and forth so everyone can see the blood and understand. I mean, dealing with this, it's not only, oh my gosh, a terrible event, someone died, there was a bomb. It goes on and on and on. And now you have a kid, one of the older boys has to lift up his dead teacher and drag him back and forth so everyone can see the terrorist has shot him. It's the power trip that like what happens to someone who is capable of doing that? It's not a normal thing. It is the terrorists. They're not only angry and cruel and scared. They're not right in the head, is what I would say. This is something like I can understand a suicide bomber. I can understand the need and the wish. It's this torture that gets me. And then this is Volodya, one of the guys here, the driver, I think, who is behind these terror acts, he asked rhetorically. It's from the Taliban. After the Afghan war against the Russians, there were many children left without parents whom the Taliban gathered and taught them to hate Russians and Americans. Then in 2000, the fighters who came out of Afghanistan went to Chechnya. Terrorism is a child born of US and Soviet power. Terrorism that is confined to one region has many global roots. Here in Beslan, for instance, we have seen long-term repercussions of the global militant jihad, a miscreant child born and raised in Afghanistan, perhaps from unknown parents. So I've talked about, well, there's an organization here that will give you a gun, an organization here, and a religious person here that will indoctrinate you into the terrorist ideologies. But it's also something that we see on a transnational level. It's not like this is an issue in this one border area of Pakistan and Afghanistan. It's something in that particular culture. No, it is an ideology that transcends nations. It's an ideology that travels. And she points out something interesting here. One of the arguments for invading Iraq was that a bunch of the terrorists from Afghanistan had gone to Iraq after the fall of Afghanistan. And so we're just chasing the Al-Qaeda or the Taliban or whoever it is. And then Iraq is giving them, Saddam Hussein is giving them succor, giving them a place to stay, succor. It was hiding them. And then they're just going to sit there and they'll grow and grow and grow. Like one of the problems we faced in Afghanistan, as I understand it, is that you had violent, militant, jihadi Taliban folk running over the border into Pakistan and hiding out there. And so they had a safe place to expand and grow from. And as a political movement, they had a base that they can then extend themselves into Afghanistan from. And the border was very hard to control, and you had to deal with Pakistan, and Pakistan doesn't even control parts of its own country. And you have the cross-border family and tribal bits, and you have money coming in from all over the place, and so on and so on and so on. And it's the terrorists. It is no accident that the terrorists we're talking about here are all in Islamic and from the Middle East, right? This has not always been the case. There are very clear events of terrorism that take place in, say, the Americas. You look at Ireland, and you got terrorist events taking place there most definitively. You have terrorist events taking place in Africa, in Southern Africa. But right now the focus is on Islamic terrorists in the Middle East or in the Sahel region, because you have a culture, and then what happens is you have an ideology or an idea that fits that culture, that works for it. So I think it's kind of, it would. You expect this, right? That if you have a monolithic, more of a monolithic culture because of the history of Islam, of the Islamic empires, particularly because of Arabic and the Quran, and a certain religion, like the Sunni Shia outlook, right, which are vast areas of the country have these inherent religious and political tensions going on along top, and that is on top of all the cultural tensions and so on. Like Europe, we have in the Balkans there were terrorist actions taking place most definitively, and coming from the outside, right? I'm looking at the Albanians, the Macedonians, the Bosnians, and I'm like, I don't know the difference. But again, I'm from outside. I don't like the language, the culture. Who knows? And yet, as an American, I can look at the Americans and go, well, you got the South, you got the South and the North, and that history. You got the history here and the bits here and the people there, and then you got racism and sexism, and I don't know where that region comes from. So, and then you hear someone's accent, and you have an idea about where they come from and with the history they grew up on, so on. But so this is something she'll point out later, right? She's like, well, you have this militant jihadi, this terrorist ideology, which is wrapped up in religion. It's not just hey, we want to be free of Britain. It is more, we want to change the world. We want to attack the Americans, for example. And the Americans are global. They're everywhere. Or we want to attack the infidels. And hey, you can paint anyone you want as the infidel. Anyone who's not exactly like you in every way, well, it must be them. And then this idea is taken over and taken over. And then you can have tribal or cultural battles, and they start calling on outside forces are like, okay, how can we get people to join us to help us? Well, we're going to work with this terrorist ideology, and that'll get people from all over the world, or all over the Middle East at least, to join us and work with us, because it's really a local issue between two tribes. But we can use the rallying cry of this ideology, or this pseudo religion, to get people to join us. Why? Because it works. We get into the idea of memes and mental viruses, like religion, politics, ideas. These are all viruses that affect the human brain. They are ideas that spread. Right? Why did Christianity end up taking over all of Europe? Why did Islam end up spreading through all of the Middle East? There were religions there before. I mean, Zoroastrianism still exists. Judaism still exists. But why were they effective? It's partially a tax base. It's partially changes in military powers. It's partially education. But it's also the binding idea. And terrorism just takes advantage of this. It's a virus on the virus, as it is. It doesn't mean to say that all viruses are bad, but it acts in that way. It replicates itself. You're religious, and then your friend becomes religious, and then you form a religious group, and then all of a sudden you're getting other people to join your religion. It's going to be the same with politics, right? You have a political idea. Your friend joins you, agrees with you with this political idea. Then you have other people joining you with this political idea. Then you have a political party. Then you have protests. Then you have a movement. And in many cases, it's not about a good or bad movement. It's about being there at the right time, at the right moment. Would Islam had spread out of the Arabian Peninsula if the Persian Empire had been at the height of its power? Probably not. Would Christianity have spread if the Roman or Greek religions were, what's the word? Were more monolithic in their ideas and their morals and in their organization? Probably not. Would Christianity have spread it all into the New World if we hadn't forced the Indians into missions? That's debatable. It's about timing as much as anything else, democracy. Why is democracy taking over the world? Well, partially it's because of the American military power. Partially it's because of this struggle between democracy and the Soviet Union. Why are kingdoms less rare? Well, why right now in our current era are dictatorships rising again? Because it's a virus that takes advantage of the state of being, a state of events, a state of the culture, or state of the politics, state of the economy at this moment. Never quite the same as the old idea, but always reinvigorating itself, changing itself. So this is a girl who talked with one of the terrorists, and they say I'm not here for money. I'm a warrior, a mujahideen of Allah. Do you live poorly? No, he told me. I have one brother and 6 sisters. My brothers live in Russia. We are not here for money, but because of the idea of liberty for Chechnya. Like these terrorists are claiming, we're not here for religion. We're not here for that reason. We're here to free our country. We're here to make a change. And yet, how do you justify this? How do you justify we're going to save our country by imprisoning a bunch of people? Well, it turns out that a religious idea can give you a lot of justification for that, right? She says we're not religion. I'm not religious. This isn't for religious reasons. And then Larissa reflects for a moment and continues, we are the right religion, and the more we kill the wrong religion, the more right we have to be in paradise, they answered me. I'm like, so you have here a failure of logic, right? We aren't religion, but I'm going to use religion to argue for why I can do this thing. And so what that exposes is that religion, the religious ideas, actually have nothing to do with this. It's just an excuse. It's just a reason. It's you can read a book and it's not about what the book says. It's about how you interpret it. It's not about what the politics or the ideal or the philosophy says at all. It can say anything whatsoever. It's how you interpret it. Right? We know this from how we speak to people. How many times have we, just as folk involved in conversation, said something and been misunderstood? Like, I didn't mean for you to take it that way. Or I said this thing, but I didn't mean for you to interpret it in that way. Or I didn't mean to be offensive. Right? And like we get into bits and we're trying to talk and explain and even work out what exactly we mean, because maybe we don't know entirely. Or maybe I'm sitting here babbling to a camera for an hour because I'm not entirely sure what I believe or how I should act or how I should feel. And I'm absolutely, completely sure that many of the words I say will be misinterpreted, will be taken out of context. Will be seen or heard as from somebody who decides, well, he said that one thing once, so that must be his entire personality. That must be their entire identity. And I'm like, well, no, that's like something I said for randomly speaking to a camera, babbling for an hour about a book, on part 5 of something. Right? That is an idea I had that passed through me once and was expressed by me once without a great deal of self-reflection. And maybe I can change or modify it or move it. Maybe there's something more to be found, or maybe I'll stand by it. Like, who knows? It takes time to figure this out. It takes a self-challenge. But what I'm trying to put out here, right? The religion isn't the point. It's how do they feel, right? This girl she's talking to is angry and scared and wants to change things, wants to save her country, and she finds that religion gives her the moral reasoning for doing this. She says, well, you must be in the wrong religion, so I can attack you. That says that I am morally allowed to do these terrible things. And you see this in all the terrorists. Every single one of them has said, they attacked me first. They assaulted me first. They threw me in prison. They attacked my people. They killed my friends. They enslaved my country. They imprisoned my family. They blew up my house. Every single one of them has a moral reason for why they are allowed to involve themselves in terrorism. Not saying it's a good moral reason or a consistent moral reason, but they have some. And so that's interesting, right? That you need a moral allowance. We exist as moral people in a moral realm. We have these identities based around allowed and disallowed actions. So another, suggestion, how do you stop terrorism? You have to show that terrorism is not only an ineffective means of achieving a political end, but also an immoral means of achieving a political end. So to show that terrorism is ineffective, you have to make sure, don't bow to terrorism and so on. But also you have to show that there is some other way in which you can achieve those ends. You can do them through democracy or through economic changes or through electing someone else, right? You can do them through leaving and going to a different country, right? You can do something to change your life that doesn't involve terrorism. And you also have to paint terrorism as bad, which means you have to paint something else as good. Democracy is good, voting is good, art is good, music is good, expressing yourself is good, becoming an individual, challenging and questioning. right? They said, the terrorists here, they said in the future all the world will be Muslim and Islam will be the only religion. The terrorists hold the hostages. If you accept Allah as your God and there is no one above him, your souls will be saved in the third day. You will release us on the third day. The people asked, no, you will go to paradise, the terrorists answered. Again, just religion as an excuse, right? It is used as a psychological means of dealing with pain and the fear of death. So these terrorists are like, well, I'm going to die. Life sucks. And religion helped me emotionally come to terms with this. So now religion can help you emotionally come to terms with it. So you see that this weird dichotomy. At the same time, the terrorists are shooting people and killing them and imprisoning these kids and not allowing them to drink water. They're telling them, I'm going to help you because if you convert to my religion, then that will help you. I know I'm hurting you, but I'm going to help you. And how many times have we seen this? The number of freaking abusers who have the same stupid claim. I'm hurting you in order to help you. Right? I know I'm beating you or I'm evil or I'm blaming you for things. I know I despise you, I do these terrible things, but really it's for your own good. And really you should follow what I say and believe what I do and you listen to my words. And I'm like, no, look, you're a bad person. You're not helping me by beating me up, by shooting me, right? Trying to... This bit, right? Look, if you have a religion that converts people and you forcibly converting people into that religion, the claim is always, oh my God, we're saving their souls. I'm like, you aren't saving my soul, you're damning my soul. You're having me act in a certain way without the belief that is the foundation of that act. Right? You're having me like... this is, in religion, at least in my personal view, of course, enters into here because we're talking about religion. But like, look, forcing someone to join your religion seems to me itself sacrilegious. It seems to me that you don't actually have faith in your own religion and your own teachings and your own philosophy because you actually have faith in a gun or a sword. It's a wonderful way to expand your religion, holding a sword or a knife to somebody's head and saying, bow or die, follow this God, make these abasements, disavow your previous life or die. Yeah, all sorts of people can agree to that, but you weaken the heart of your religion and turn it into politics. You turn it into an excuse. You turn it into a virus instead of a medicine. So that's what you see happening here, right? I'm going to hurt you in order to help you. I'm like, no, you just want to make yourself feel better about what you're doing. Just want to use your beliefs, your religion, your philosophy, or your politics as an excuse to hurt somebody so that you can feel powerful and that is morally permitted because I'm evil, because I don't believe everything you say, like you're the God figure. I'm like, no, just another person. So it's again, frustrating to read. But you see like why this happens. I don't see myself as bad. I don't believe that I myself am bad. And yet if I do bad things, then how do I justify that? Well, I have to pretend. I have to claim that these bad things are being done for the right reasons, or that these bad things are done to bad people. I have to like soothe my own, what does she call it? Psychache. I have to soothe my own psychache that is caused. This is the idea that Gandhi has with the nonviolence, that by hurting somebody, you actually hurt yourself. Well, if you hurt yourself by hurting somebody else, then you end up being injured. And how do you deal with that injury? You bandage it. You cover it up. You try to heal it. You try to put on a skin graft on your burns. You use a religion or philosophy or a politics or an idea or a tribalism or a family or a history in order to soothe the pain that you cause yourself by attacking someone other than you. So, how do you get people to see that doing this damage is injurious to themselves? How do you get someone to see that, enforcing religion by the point of the sword is destructive of your ideas. You have to strip it away. You have to again, Gandhian idea. You have to see people as individuals, spirit to spirit, unveiled before the eyes of the mind. And all of a sudden they aren't a Viking or an Irishman or an Englishman or an American or a Syrian or an Afghani or an Egyptian or a Colombian or a Japanese. They are a person, individual, and the religion, the philosophy, the politics, the history, this is all wiped away before the understanding that you and I are both people. That male, female, young, old, these are but fleshy masses and the opportunity for learning. They are not an actual feeling and understanding. But this is hard, right? How do you get someone to take off all their bandages, take off all their skin grafts, to accept their own pain? This is what, like Christianity, for example, or the Abrahamic religions try to do, right? You have sinned. You are bad. We're going to rip off all these bandages. We're going to show you, here's the story of this Good Samaritan, right? And how they did this thing, and they did this thing. And here's the story of John the Baptist. Here's the story of Judas. Here's the story of the Romans who beat and burn people. Here's the story of that person or this other person, and they did bad things and bad things and bad things, and that's sort of like what you've done. You can see it, but if you follow my religion, then now you can feel better about it. I will fix you. And so you tear off the bandages and you put on new bandages. You show them their sin, and and then you give them forgiveness. You attack and hurt them, and you make them see themselves as terrible. Look at what you have done. There's other people here. She talks about she talks about some people who were like religious terrorists, and then they're convinced by an imam that what they have done is actually unreligious, disreligious. Actually what they have done is against the Quran or the book, and so they end up killing themselves because they feel so guilty about what they have done, and they don't have that bandage, that help from their religion anymore. So they're unveiled in spirit before their own mind's eye, and they can't handle it. Which is what psychology tries to do, I think. It tries to say, well, let me show you who you are as a person, how your biology works, how why you do these things, and how to make yourself feel better without, drinking or drugs. Again, it's not easy. Why? Because it's an individual exercise between a person and a person. You go into a psychologist's office and you're trying to be understood. You go into AA meetings and you're not talking. You're going for groups of 5 or 10 or 15. So you have enough of a small enough group that you can communicate and feel connections. But if you're in a group of 1,000 or 2,000 or 3,000, then you can't communicate individually. You have a central figure that speaks and it connects with all of you. Or you have an ideology, or you have a music that connects all of you. And so you become a more communal idea. And this communal idea, like any religion or politics or fan base of a Seiyu or a rock star, allows you to do great and powerful things by acting together as one. It molds the various pieces of humanity into one being with one mighty activity. But this also allows for danger. It's like any virus, like any idea. In fact, it's like any cancer. All of a sudden, it spreads throughout the body, and you can't handle that because it's all homogenous. And you come to the central struggle of civilization. If you have many disparate and different individuals, then they are resistant to absolute destruction. But they are weak. They don't work together. If you have a group of people that are all together and all have one idea and one belief and are one tribe, let's say, then they are great and powerful. They can do amazing things, but they are vulnerable to whatever attacks their weakness. They all drink from the same well, or read from the same book, or follow the same person, and have the same weaknesses. Okay. And then they go on and on about there's only so much you can read about this before it just comes just horrible. But it's important to see about the history here. Like most terrorists who blame the government and its citizens that they feel justified to attack, Basiev concludes responsibilities with the whole Russian nation, which through its silent approval gives a yes. Basiev goes on to detail the demand of the hostage takers during the siege and argues that they are freedom fighters, stating that his side remains willing to peacefully negotiate for a free, independent Chechnya, while downplaying that his group just killed over 300 children. Again, this is politics. This is Israel and Palestine all over again. The terrorism, the activities, none of it is about the religion or the killing. It's about this political movement. It's about using and taking folk who are emotionally vulnerable and giving them an outlet which is destructive. Using them as a hammer and a gun. And this is what the book is pushing us towards. This is the understanding the book is trying to have. Right? It talks about the terrorists who are involved in this situation. It's like, well, they died, and these are men as young boys who witnessed mass rape and slaughter. Her words echo many other interviews Kapta and I collected from Chechens, in which we learn that those who are fugitives are often willing to become martyrs because the alternative, being captured, brutally tortured, and killed, appears far worse, right? If you think you're going to die, go out in the way that is best for you. If the alternative to being captured is blowing yourself up, that sucks, right? But if capturing means torture for days, screaming and losing body parts and being burned and being stuck in cages and knowing that you failed to change anything or do anything and you're sitting in a gulag for 40 years, slowly losing pieces of yourself to frostbite. That's a horrible way to die. It's not exactly a way to live. So you have the reaction here. How do you deal with terrorists who you have captured? How do you deal with mass murders? How do you deal with people who have done terrible things? Do you lock them up? Do you torture them yourself as revenge? You get the problem of interrogation, for example. God, what is it that we have? I know this off the top of my head. Guantanamo Bay. Right? You have the problem of Guantanamo Bay. You take some terrorists and you torture them for information. And maybe this information is good, maybe it's bad. Everyone disagrees. But the central heart of the question is, do you do terrible things to these people? Is that permitted because they're terrible? Is it permitted because we're trying to stop such horrible activities? Is it not something we want to do? Because it injures ourselves? Because it inspires folk not to become captured? I mean, how many people decided to blow themselves up before being captured because they didn't want to be waterboarded. You want the enemy to give up. You don't want to have to slaughter all 50,000 of the enemy soldiers. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of death. It's going to cost you a lot to do that in money and manpower. Much easier to get them to just give up. Than fighting, to the death. But you have to make them believe that they aren't going to be tortured and killed. You have to show them that that there's no point in fighting to the death because they could live. It's not just, a horrible death from torture, but it's the chance of living and maybe being released from jail from someday, having a regular life. And you're asking, okay, do I really want to kill myself, or is there hope yet remaining? Is there a glimmer of hope? It seems as like I can't even say some of this. As with many things, so the ending of this chapter, as with many things that Seta has shared with me, things that she witnessed firsthand in Chechen during the wars and now from Ingushetia, I have no reply. I feel sickened inside with horror and realization that humanity is capable of such deaths of depravity. And it seems to cycle around and around again, trying to find an outlet and some means of healing, unfortunately repeating the violence instead of addressing it correctly with truth, justice, and reconciliation. I wonder, as long as these types of things occur, if there can ever be an end to terrorism. Okay. So now she goes to Europe. She goes to the jihad in Belgium, and I'm going to skip over some of this and just talk in general without reading every single page, because I want to end this next time. And these short bits right here could be an entirely other hour. Right, so she's in Belgium. She's talking to Moroccan kids. What do you see as the reasons for Moroccans becoming radicalized in Belgium? Discrimination, Jamal says. The person who becomes radicalized, maybe he's watching TV doing nothing, thinking I'm here doing nothing. The country doesn't mean me and another does. I am Belgian. I was born here, Jamal says. I have both Belgian and Moroccan passports. But in Morocco, people say, go away, Belgian guy. Here they tell me, go away, Moroccan. We lack identity. When I ask him about the situation in the nightclubs, he answers, I don't try to go to the clubs often because it's difficult to enter. Angry is like a tension inside. I ask myself, who is the doorkeeper to say to me, don't enter? He has the power to make me feel less than I am. Who do I have to be to enter? Only important people can enter? We Moroccans always have to prove who we are to enter, to be respected. Apparently in Brussels, the Moroccan guys aren't allowed in the nightclubs. Like, the bouncers turn them away because they think they cause problems, or they think, who knows what exactly. They don't want a bunch of dark-skinned folk stand to take it over. It becomes a Moroccan club based on cultural identities. And then, they don't know. It talks about the the Moroccans here, they don't know the Quran. Everything they know from the Quran is in French. The person radicalizing them can change the translations from the original Arabic as they like, and they won't know it. They don't know their own religion. It's a natural defense if attacked from every side, feeling angry and upset to become radicalized. Right? He's like, look, the Moroccan kids, we can't get jobs, and when we're stuck between this Moroccan identity and this Belgian identity, and we aren't Belgium and we aren't Moroccan, and this is what you have when you're growing up in a different culture, right? You grow up in the States, and I know literally hundreds of people, right? Their parents are from another country. Their parents don't speak English, or don't speak it well, and the kids grow up, they have to translate, and there are cultural differences. The kids are more Americanized. And it is very, very clear to see. You go to somebody's house and you realize, oh, your mother or father is from the old country. And this is just a kid I knew at school. I'm thinking he's just like every other kid. And for the most part he is, but then you realize, oh, there's complications here. And this is one of the strengths of America, I think, is that you originally, it is one of the places in the world where you can go to America and you can become American. You know, if you go to Japan, it's very difficult to become Japanese, and if you don't look Japanese, good luck with that. You know, you go to Vietnam and you don't look Vietnamese, you can have some problems. You go to England and you don't sound English, you don't have that accent. You go to Italy, right? You can join in the culture. You can become Italianized, or become Greekized, or become Mexicanized. It doesn't mean you're Mexican. But in America, you become Americanized, and that means you are American. Now, there's pushback against that in my country, of course, which I think is idiotic, and a misunderstanding of the American identity. But it's one of the reasons people get mad about immigration, because they feel, oh my gosh, people are coming here and they aren't American. Which threatens to make the United States become just like every other country. It does away with American exceptionalism. It's idiotic. And conservative in a very backwards way, I think. It's retro conservatism, I think. You know, misinterprets the past. It looks at the failures of America with like the Chinese Exclusion Act and says, well, that's what made America great. And I'm like, no, that harmed America in so many ways, and you just don't understand it. Or at least that's my opinion, and so on. You know, that American identity is based around a philosophy and not a land or a race. But I mean, even in the States, you have today people, well, America is about the white race or white racial philosophy. America's always been racialized. I'm like, well, yes, and not entirely, right? There is this idea threading its way through of meritocracy and individuality and acceptance. It doesn't always arise at the surface, but it's there at least. Right. So the Moroccan kids, they're angry, and you have a subcurrent of militant ideas that enter into it. And all of a sudden you can meet somebody somewhere who tells you about, oh, I know this person, I know this religion, I know this group, or here's a video about what is happening in Morocco, or what is happening in Albania, or what is happening in Kurdistan, or what is happening in Iran, or what is happening in Sudan, or what is happening in Syria, or pick a country, right? And there's going to be some group in it that doesn't like the way that country is run. Shoot, look at what's happening in America. Pick your left or your right propaganda, and it's going to tell you that the world is about to end. It always is about to end. Yeah. My students at the university often tell me stories of how the second-generation Belgians of Moroccan immigrant descent are often blocked from going out to nightclubs, renting apartments in certain areas of town, getting good jobs, and so on, while the white Belgians complain that they don't integrate well. For me, it is reminiscent of the discrimination blacks in the US faced before the civil rights movement. But I give it little thought until I learn more. It's this mistrust and dislike of another group because we form our own tribal or political or philosophical or social identities, which then feel threatened by someone else, like anyone else who claims that they are of a certain type. You see other people. This is the dangers of tribalism, right? Tribalism is a reaction to a stressful environment and helps us to exist as a powerful person with many forms and faces. But tribalism also needs, in many cases, like it says, this is my land or this is my people. And those who would not be my land and my people are an enemy. It's very hard, I think, to find a tribal identity, as in, we are all one people who believe and act in a certain way. So it could be a tribal identity or a religious identity or anything like that. And yet we also accept others who do not act in that way. We can be like, there's a difference between I'm a Mormon or I'm a Muslim or I'm a Baptist, and I'm friends with these other people. I'm friends with the Mormons or the Muslims or the Baptists, but I am not them. And so friendship can only go so far. I was at my community college once, and there was an imam that came and spoke. And he was saying something like for him, his religion was the moral identity, and he told a entire, I want to say there were like 40 or 50 people listening to this lecture. And he was a guest, right? He told an entire class, group of like 50 students that he wouldn't trust anyone entirely who wasn't Islamic, as if the religion was the morality. We see this same claim in American Christianity sometimes. Well, if you're not a Christian, then I won't trust you. You could be immoral, you could be bad, as if the religion was the morality, as if the book or the understanding or the tribe or the identity determined who you were as a person. And that, I think, is a misunderstanding of human psychology, of who individuals are. It comes down more than your morals, your religion, it comes down to your psychology. It comes down to, is this person angry? Does this person like to harm other people? Does this person keep their word? Is this person kind? Is this person honorable? Is this person honest? Is this a psychopath or a sociopath or a pessimist? Is this person hopeful? Is this person willing to talk things out, or they revert to violence first is the answer? Do they want to understand, or are they hidebound? Are they willing to change, or do they dislike change in any way? Religion and politics and philosophy and identities like this are just excuses for us acting how we want to act. When they don't match how we want to act, then we experience stresses and problems, right? If you want to act in a certain way, but your religion says you can't act in that certain way, your morality that you've been taught and you believe is good says you can't act in that certain way, then you find stress in this. And you start being erratic, or you start pushing back against it, or you start hating yourself on the inside. And either you change who you are, or you end up rejecting that religion, that morality entirely. I mean, the number of priests the number of Catholic priests who are pedophiles is insane, because they aren't able to control themselves, and they aren't able to be honest with themselves either. You just end up doing horrible things to horrible people and then hiding it because you're ashamed of it. And why are you ashamed of it? Because you think it's bad, or think it's bad because of the religion. And yet there's something in you which does these horrible things anyway. So the answer, of course, is to fix and change yourself. Because if you're feeling ashamed of what you're doing, then there's a reason for this. If you're doing something bad anyway, then there's a reason for that. Something isn't matching. You either don't understand yourself, you don't understand the religion, or you aren't willing to actually act in a moral fashion. Even though you claim and hide behind a moral barrier, you use the situation you have as a means of hiding. You refuse to be questioned. If someone who refuses to be questioned is someone very dangerous, because that probably means they refuse to question themselves either. Okay. And she goes to Antwerp. Wait, the same story. My 20-year-old guide, Taysir, who is studying business at the Free University of Brussels, and also a second-generation immigrant of Moroccan descent, makes this frustration clear. When I graduate university, he told me angrily, I will leave Belgium. I'll go and live in Qatar or some other Muslim country where I am welcomed. Here I can never belong. I will always be a Moroccan Muslim and hated. Interviews with such youth reveal that they encounter daily discrimination, and many speak of insults and humiliations when they are turned away from work, with comments like, no Belgian would want to see a Moroccan face at the front desk. Our customers would not feel comfortable dealing with you. We cannot offer you a professional job despite your college diploma, but there are job openings for cleaning the toilets. The bite of this discrimination extends to the home, public square, and nightclubs. Frequently, landlords make clear to their white tenants that they will not accept subleases with Moroccan Belgians, and turn Moroccans away, telling them the leases have already been filled. And as I already witnessed, bouncers in the nightclubbing scene routinely turn away Moroccan youth, telling them the club is full, turning around in the space of minutes to admit white Belgian youth. One young man recalls being told, go home Moroccan, and he had a Belgian passport. This wholesale rejection of Moroccan youths into the clubs leads to gangs of young Belgian men of North African descent angrily roaming the streets on weekend nights. Just a few months before today, I asked a Belgian government official how this kind of discrimination could be happening on a systemic basis. His answer was equally shocking. Well, the Moroccans cause nearly all the problems in the nightclubs, right? There's nothing like routine rejection for breeding complex emotions, including anger and hatred. If people just don't accept who you are, they don't like you. If you're white or black or green or gray or gay or straight or bi or furry or what's the word? You marry you marry many people. Poly, whatever. And then you're like, well, I don't fit in my religion, I don't fit in my group, I don't fit in my family. And so you end up crushing and squeezing yourself. And what do? Right? Do you end up hating the country and the people and the culture that puts you in this situation. You see this in the States sometimes with racism. You meet someone who like blames whitey for everything. It's like, hates the white person. You're like, okay. Yes, there are complex historical reasons going on here, and you can have problems with the culture, but like not every single thing ever is due to the white person. Yeah. Or I mean, I've heard people be this like, well, it's the black part of town and they're all criminals. And I'm like, well, okay, that is an extreme oversimplification of a long history of economic differences, economic and cultural and racial effects going on here, which leads to a ghetto where crime is more rampant. I'm like, oh my gosh, you can take a whole view of things and simplify it down. It's the same exact problem as before, right? With the many disparate parts versus one. If you take a situation and you look at the individual instances, all the complexities, the huge number of intersectionalities, then you understand it very clearly, but you are almost unable to do anything to affect it. You're almost unable to articulate the thoughts and opinions you have about it, because every time you say something, another aspect intervenes. And you end up talking for hours about racism instead of having a 30-minute lecture where you get your ideas nice and clear. But when you do that 30-minute lecture, when you have this idea that simplifies everything down, you miss out on a lot of nuances. You miss out on a lot of the edge cases. But you can also be very effective. You can also move things forward. Right? You look at the book on anti-racism, like, okay, I have a lot of problems with the viewpoint, and there are complexities involved here, and I don't think that this action is perfectly right, and I can agree with this action. But as a rallying cry, down with racism, it gets people to walk all in the same direction. It gets people to move, and there is something admirable in that. That this is an activity or an idea, or a virus, a mental virus, right, which has an effect which I agree with. There are complexities that are lost in it, and there isn't a clear ending that I understand, but there's something positive in it still. The other problem can arise, though. I mean, the exact same idea happens in anti-black racism. Instead of seeing an individual, you say, well, they're all black, and so they all act like this. The same happens in politics. Well, they're all right-wing, so they all act like this. I'm like, okay, look, there's a lot of complexities in the Republican Party. There's a lot of complexities in the Democratic Party. There are huge issues around the urban versus the rural versus how it is in different states versus, how the politics work out and who has the largest voice and whatnot. You look at what was I talking about earlier, abortion and anti-abortion. Well, there are complex stances one can take within that two-color dichotomy. But too many complex stances means nothing gets done. Everyone has their own idea, and they're all trying to make perfection. The one possible benefit of having a blank idea, simplifying things down, is that it's not perfect, but maybe it's good. Maybe it moves somewhere. Although it might move in the wrong direction, you might get some terrorist ideology going on here, which says to people, you can change things by blowing places up and killing folk. I'm like, okay, well, that does do something. It might not do what you want it to do, besides just ending your psychic pain of existence, but it does something. Because this is one of the problems of education, right? we got to learn and learn and learn and instruct. But eventually the philosophies, they come down to action. They come down to, how do I experience? How do I feel? It's like any religion, right? You're going to have a crisis of religion at some point and go, okay, what do I actually believe? How do I actually act in this situation if I'm a good Christian or Muslim or Jew or Buddhist or whatnot, right? And until you have that crisis, I don't think you really have a really strong basis for your belief system. And it's the same in a philosophy. I can sit here and expound on a dozen philosophies from a dozen different philosophers, but what do I actually do? What do I actually act as if that philosophy is true, or that philosophy is effective or actual? What do I hope is the case, and act in response in regard to that? Actions speak louder than words. For good reason is that statement held. Yeah, but she's going on about this, and this is interesting. Hamid, she talks to, found the militant jihad. Hamid's road to violent extremism started, interestingly enough, at the internet cafe. He was checking his email and talking with friends with someone he didn't know, asked if he'd yet seen a particular movie on the internet. He hadn't, so they looked at it together. It was about attacks against Islamic people in various parts of the world. I was crying, Hamid recalls, after seeing it. It was about the situation of the Muslim Ummah. It showed babies dying in Palestine, women, old people, victims of the Iraq boycott, victims of Iran, Afghanistan, Sudan, Somalia, Chechnya, and then our lack of responses. And it showed Osama bin Laden. And then he's like, Hamid said the recruiter began immediately to appeal to him on many levels, to a sense of duty, tender-heartedness for the victims, and anger at what had happened to them. Hamid recalls how the recruiter manipulated his thoughts and emotions. He said we must prepare ourselves. He spoke about Bosnia and Serbia, that they were Europeans and neighbors too, but killed each other. He said we are neighbors here. It can happen here as well, that one day they can decide to kill all of us. How do you get an angry young man to act? You tell him other people in the world have suffered what you suffer. You tell him that you are not safe where you are. You tell him that all that anger and fear and distress you feel is real and is valid. And it is very dangerous to do that. Because you're piling on and piling on. And when you pile on the pressure like that, it looks for an escape valve. And what escape valve does it have? Ideally, it can talk to his parents, his brothers, his sister, his girlfriend, his friends, his school counselor. He can go and become involved in a soccer game or in a League of Legends tournament. Or he can do all these things to deal with the stress, but he has to know those are answers to his stress. He has to know that works for him. And sometimes when you end up doing, I think a lot of the time, what you end up doing is really just a product of your environment, right? I ended up playing Yu-Gi-Oh! A lot when I was in high school. Why? Because I didn't feel like I fit in much of anywhere, but I could sit down at this table and I could play cards. And this is how you connect with people. You become part of a culture. And nowadays, I don't really play Yu-Gi-Oh! Very much because it turns out I wasn't there for the game. I was there for the people. It's the same here, right? You are influenced by someone. And if you're influenced by your friends and your peers, then you all sort of grow together. But if you're influenced by an older person, then they can direct you in certain directions. They can push you in certain directions. They can make you blind to other options, and so you believe them and follow them. So how do you break that cycle? How do you talk to a kid who is indoctrinated into an idea? You have to get him to question those ideas. You have to get him to grow. You can't just knock him out of the militant idea. You have to have him evolve out of this militant ideology. Right. Then when she's talking to some guy, Muhammad, who is in London. And there's a guy standing up shouting about, don't invade our countries. When Western countries invade Muslim countries, you're going to have a problem. I have love for you and I have respect for you, but once you invade my Muslim brothers, it's a different story automatically. What you're there for is tourists, you steal their oil and natural resources. When you come as a pirate, you will see only the sword. Democracy, you come into our countries to implement the laws of men to govern mankind. No, we have our own laws called Sharia. So don't invade our countries in the first place on the pretext of lies. Talking about how well you're building up homes and bridges after you have destroyed them. Right? So what's he saying here? The failure of, like, when you look at Afghanistan and Iraq, like what was the failure of Afghanistan and Iraq? That we thought as Americans we could go in there and we could fix the country. We could build bridges, we could give jobs, we could change the culture, and it turns out we could not. So you go in promising all these things to both Afghanistanis and the Americans that we can do this, and it turns out we can't, or we don't. Or is it because it was impossible, because we were incompetent, because we didn't go far enough? Who knows? It doesn't matter at the end. Why? It matters that. She talks to another guy in here, Soliman. Not exactly sure how to say that. Some of these names I know how to say because I've encountered them in my daily life. Others, not so much. Suleiman is a person who has worked intensively with 15 teens that went to terrorist training camps during the year 2006 to 8 in England. A day earlier, Abdul Azim, a youth worker from the Brixton Mosque, Lambeth part of town, had told me similar stories of how the gangs in the poor areas of London have become heavily influenced by Islam, and that some are now referred to as the Muslim boys, whose criminality is totally sanctioned by the militant jihadi ideologies, who explain to the kids that, according to Islamic definitions, they are living in a state of war inside the UK, and that to steal and take the booties of war are justified Islamic actions. Again, it's just an excuse. It's a reason to. It's a system where they can moralize what they want to do anyway. And then they identify themselves in this way, you know. So like, he's like, it's a protection for the girls to be Muslim. In South London, the boys are always grabbing them up and touching them, he says. The DNS gang is the worst. They go around and stop the girls in the street, feeling her up, take her phone, get her phone number. They says no, they slash her. You can see all kinds of girls with slash marks on their faces or necks. If she's a Muslim in a headscarf, they won't do it. In addition to the protection it provides, Suleiman explains that conversions are also a way to assert one's identity. It's a rebellious thing to be Islamic. It's considered the antithesis of Christianity, like being a punk rocker. The baggy hip-hop look fits right into the Muslim style. There are a lot of these kids that don't have strong paternal presence, he explains. Then someone with a full beard, fire in his eyes, and passion comes along saying, you are fantastic, you are great. Maybe you were a sinner before, but now all of you can become mujahideen. This represents a form of masculinity for them. Offers, like, that's the bit, right? It says you can be violent and strong, and that's okay, and that's good. the militant ideology, as opposed to, well, you need to be nonviolent. But what if nonviolence doesn't work? What if you feel like you can't escape your environment? You want to hit something, especially if you're a 16, 18, 19-year-old person and you're frustrated and you can't get a job, or you aren't educated and you're poor, and you go back home and your father beats you and your mother's crying and your siblings are starving and the place is full of mold, and you're just like, why the hell am I even alive? So you wander the streets, you make friends, and then one of your friends introduced you to the guy who inspired them, and all of a sudden, oh, I want to be like you. Look at that person. He's strong and angry, and he's saying that I am okay to be angry too. This is one of the important bits that I think is really, really misunderstood with how human beings essentially deal with those who disagree with them. Right? In the States, you hear about the right and the left, and each side says, I don't even understand why these people can even think that way. I don't understand how someone could possibly be pro-abortion. I don't understand how anyone could possibly support Donald Trump. I don't understand how anyone could possibly think this or think that, or feel this or feel that. And so you end up at an impasse. And one of the things that people, at least in the States, that I've encountered is the idea that I don't understand how anyone could possibly want to be violent. I don't understand how anyone could possibly want to blow themselves up. I don't see how anyone could possibly want to kill themselves. That's insane. I'm like, no. That's not insane. It's a very human reaction. Look at all of history. There's a reason berserkers exist. There's a reason war happens everywhere all the time. Right? There's a reason you have frustrated people. There's a reason there are bullies in school. We try to teach people that fighting is bad because there are other ways to achieve our goals. But fighting and violence is very natural. Being frustrated and wanting to do something about it, and hitting somebody, or getting into a punching bag, or getting into MMA or boxing, or football, where you can run into people and get your aggression out, is a real thing that exists. And vilifying people because they see that as an option, because that works for them, can involve also rejecting them entirely. Oh, they hurt somebody, so they must be bad. They were violent this one time, so they must be bad. And I'm like, look, they were human. Now, if they're violent over and over again, if they refuse to countenance any other way of resolving their issues, then this becomes a problem. But the problem is not the violence. The problem is the one-dimensionality, as I see it. It's like the same thing with someone who is like a protester, let's say, okay? And you go out and you wave signs. Yes, good. You have something you feel very strongly about and you're willing to change it. But what can happen is the group of people who are demonstrating against a political movement, demonstrating for a political movement or against an idea, end up fighting against themselves as they encounter various minor differences in how they should fight this issue. A splinter group over who leads, a splinter group over how a certain phrase is used, a splinter group over which issues should be tackled first, a splinter group over race, or a splinter group over the position you have in the organization, or how the organization is organized, or where the protest takes place. You can have a split over ideologies. You can have a split over methods. I don't think you should be, punching policemen, but sort of thing. And yet, in order to achieve a goal, we run into this balancing act, right, between the individual and the group. How do you balance the understanding that you have many different methods and ideas for how to achieve a goal, and yet that you all must move as one? How do you create a wave instead of a bunch of droplets of rain? How do you soak the ground instead of just splattering on the rocks? There's no easy answer. There's no simple answer. But at least part of it, I feel, has to do with acceptance of, or realization at least of, that other people are different than you and have different feelings and beliefs and methods. And just because they are different, just because they are, in this case, something that we think of as bad, that is violent, does not mean they don't have reasons for being so. Does not mean there isn't some legitimacy in why they're acting this way. Does not mean that they don't have some reason for doing this. This is one of the conundrums of dealing with a protest movement. That if you have massive numbers of people protesting, if you have massive disruption, and that doesn't do anything, then eventually it turns violent, because people see that what they're doing doesn't have any effect. So they try something else, and eventually you end up just, by random happenstance, getting a group that chooses violence. And how do you react to that is really a question. Do you reject it entirely, or do you try to see that violence means that there is enough of a push, there's enough of a reason and an emotion behind this to make people choose these violent means of expression? We don't, instead of seeing violence as a cause, you see it as a symptom of how extreme the events have gotten. You see it as a way of understanding that, okay, there's something going on here that we aren't addressing. How do you fight against an ideology? You have to give that ideology space to evolve and grow. You have to allow them to defend themselves, essentially, even if you don't understand why they feel the need to defend themselves. The point of the fact is they do, and they exist, and you have to deal with them. And there is always the other option, right? There's always the violent option. There's always the, well, just kill them all and let God sort them out. There's always the, just deport all of them, just kick them all out of the country. There's always the, let's take every single one of them and put them in jail. There's always the, let's not let even a single Moroccan kid into the nightclubs, because we don't want any trouble. And and we know that these kids are violent and cause problems. But really, it's just a small group. Or really, the violence is because of something you're doing and you don't even see it. All the complexities. It's like asking in the States, well, why do you have large areas in inner cities with high crime that are also black and with bad economics? Well, there's a lot of reasons for that. But the reasons for it existing are very different than the reasons for it continuing. Is what I would say. Is what I feel. So Suleiman says, yes, it was, Suleiman answers, and he was the one who made me realize that I was smart. He said it to me one day while he was cutting my hair. He ran over his hands over my face and said, you're fairly smart, you know. As Suleiman recalls, it was that one statement that saved him. Seeing himself positively in the eyes of another person who he respected changed everything. It was then Suleiman realized he could be someone, that he had the way out. Suleiman had the looking glass experience, which sociologists refer to as the social mirroring of self. All of Suleiman's previous experiences had told him he was garbage, nothing, a throwaway ghetto kid. But the care and nurture of another person suddenly filled the hole left by his hole left. As this man's words told Suleiman something that he could resonate inside as truth. He is smart, and someone else had finally seen it and affirmed it. Suleiman said he began studying at that point. And now, perhaps because he was rescued out of the street life by the care of another person, he feels obligated to pass it on, even at great personal risk to himself. So it's not just hope for a better life. It is, I would say, the understanding that the people who engage in terrorism have reasons for engaging in terrorism. May not be what we think are the best reasons or the most valid reasons or the correct reasons or the most effective reasons, but they are reasons that exist that someone has and someone feels and someone believes in. And they look at us in the same way, right? They look at the Americans or the English or the people in charge of the Egyptian government or whatnot, and they say, well, they are wrong. We are wrong. They are wrong. The other side is wrong. They don't understand. They have their reasons. Like, how many times do we say, well, it's just bureaucratic infighting, or they're unwilling to change, or the government won't say, or these people are hiding, or these people are lying, or they're telling us one thing but they actually mean another, and we don't give not only the benefit of the doubt, but like the benefit of the belief, of the trust that someone is actually telling us who they are and why they believe and what they are doing, why they are acting, that people aren't honest. But oftentimes, more often than not, people are. It's just this refusal to believe folk that can be a problem. Because sometimes people lie. And it's not clear exactly how we, pass through hell and earth to reach the sky. But I would say part of it begins with looking terrorists in the face and understanding that they may do terrible things, but are not necessarily terrible people. They may make choices we find difficult to agree with or understand, but we can understand why they make these choices. And this is difficult because it requires empathy. This is difficult because it requires our own self-doubt, our own willingness to question our way of life and our existence and what we have done and how much we are at fault for actions like this. What could we have fixed? How do we move forward? But again, there's a difference between things are this way because of this and things continue to be this way. You can always change what we do in order to achieve a better end or a new beginning. Because we are human beings, and it's that free will, that intelligence that defines a human being, not their skin color or their shape or their culture or their religion or philosophy. It is the capability to have free will and decide and see for ourselves who we are and what the world is like. That is at the heart of the spirit of humanity, I would say.